Frankie Manning danced his way through the burgeoning New York ballrooms of the 1930s, wowing audiences with his moves. Despite a long hiatus from the dance scene, he was wooed back in the mid-1980s to teach a new generation of dancers. Since then, he is recognized as the pioneer of the Lindy Hop and has continued to make unique innovations in the world of dance as teacher, choreographer, and performer. Among his many accolades, he received a Tony Award for Best Choreography in the Broadway hit musical Black and Blue, and he was involved in the two-part TV film on American social dancing called Gotta Dance. He's hoofed his way into the KUOW studios this afternoon. Welcome, Frankie.
Well, thank you, doll.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. I mean, and I usually say at this stage of the game, I'm kind of happy to be anywhere.
And at this stage of the game, meaning you were born in 1914. You really grew up in the heyday of swing music and swing dance.
That's absolutely correct because, as you say, I was born in 1914, and if you remember in the history, that was during the period of time of World War I. And right after that is when jazz started to flourish and music started to, come to the front because everybody was under, strains from being in the war, and they wanted something to release that, strain and stress of being in the war. So music was an outlet.
Was it music that led you to dancing?
Well, yes, listening to music, and my mother, who loves to dance, but she was also a religious person. She used to take me to church, and I used to see those sisters and brothers in the church just shouting and clapping and, just moving with the rhythm of the religious music. And I kind of got into that too,
I'm curious what the music was that led you to the ballroom scene. I'm thinking of the 1930s, and the first name that comes to mind is Chick Webb, and there he was right where you were in New York.
Yeah, well, Chick Webb was actually what we call the house band at the Savoy Ballroom. The Savoy Ballroom is the ballroom that opened up in 1926. Oh, they call it the most beautiful ballroom in the world. And if you don't know anything about the Savoy Ballroom, it was a ballroom that was one whole block long and a block wide, and it had two dance bands in the ballroom all at one time. And one band would play at one time, and then they finished playing, and the next band would come on. So they had something like continuous music. So with a ballroom like that, and orchestras like Chick Webb and Fletcher Henderson and Count Basie and Duke Ellington, all those bands appearing at the Savoy Ballroom, the people, the community, they converged on this, and it made it one of the greatest ballrooms in the world. They had begun to, instead of doing like the Charleston was one of the major dances in that period of time when I was coming up. And Charleston is, if you know the type of music that they play, is go like dum 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 dum, which is like up and down. And then when these bands like Chick Webb and Fletcher Henderson and those bands started playing, they kind of smoothed it out where the music was horizontal, and that made it swing. Listening to this kind of music makes you want to dance the way that the music is playing.
Not only do we know of the musical battles of the bands, but I guess there were dance competitions of the same.
Well, yes, again, at the Savoy Ballroom and most the other, like theaters and other dance halls, they would hold a dance contest. And because Lindy Hop was coming to the front of these dances, they started holding Lindy Hop contests in most of the theaters and at the Savoy. Savoy would have a Lindy Hop contest like every Saturday night.
Now, how did that Lindy Hop develop? I understand Shorty Snowden coined that phrase, Lindy Hop, after Charles Lindbergh.
Yes. Well, this is what Shorty Snowden would tell us, like at that time they were actually calling a dance at the Savoy the breakaway. A couple would be dancing and they would like separate from each other, so they would call it the breakaway. But Shorty Snowden just added some extra little, tricky steps in there. And somebody asked him, the reporter asked him, said, "Hey, Shorty, what are you doing?" And Shorty thought of the Lindy Hop flight. So he said, "Oh, I'm doing the Lindy Hop." So the name has been there ever since.
You also added some of your own steps to the Lindy Hop, though it remained the Lindy Hop.
Yes, well, actually, like when Shorty Snowden then was coming along, and I just wanted to mention that Shorty Snowden was my idol. I used to watch this cat dance, and he had such a rhythm. I say, "Oh man, I really want to dance like that." And I did start to dance like he did, but he was like from the old school. The dancers, they were like ballroom dancers, and ballroom dancers has a straight back. And they were dancing up straight, but he had some fantastic footwork, and I felt a little bit more comfortable rather than dancing straight up. I was just bend over, bend my knees, and then bend my body forward, and then I would dance. I would try to do the same steps, but I would dance almost horizontal to the floor. Some of the other dancers look, hey, Frankie, you look like you flying, man. And that's exactly how I wanted to look. And most of the other dancers just picked up on that, and they said, "Well, man, I want to fly too."
And the other part about flying were your famous aerials, as they're now known.
Oh, yes. Well, and that actually added to the flying.
Yeah, that was literal flying.
Yes. At the time that the step was created, I didn't realize that would be such a sensation, because in my mind, I was just doing something a little bit different, or something that I thought I could do. But when I actually did it and everybody got so excited about it, I said, "Oh, man, wait a minute, maybe I did something."
That's very interesting, because I thought of this more like you're in these dance competitions and you bring out this secret weapon that no one's seen before, because it did create a sensation.
Oh, yes, it really did. Like when I was in the contest and I was dancing, at the moment that I did this step, it was the first time that anyone had did that particular, did anything like that. And it was, the audience was like silent, It seemed like it was hours, but it was only a couple of seconds. They was like silent, like they couldn't believe their eyes, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, the audience just exploded. And they were just hitting on each other and asking each other, "Hey, did you see? Did he throw? It was a great moment.
That was somewhere in the 1930s, I believe.
About 1935, latter part of 1935.
And this happened at the famous Savoy Ball?
At the famous Savoy Ballroom, yes.
Do you recall when you were doing these famous steps for the first time, or now famous steps for the first time, who the bands were that you were working with at that time?
Well, the first time I did that particular step, I was dancing to Chick Webb's band at the Savoy Ballroom. And he was playing, baby. That cat was swinging, Jim. I
went from individual couples dancing to really this group dancing.
Yeah, and that was another innovation in the Lindy Hop that I, kind of created, because all before that it was more like competition, like one couple would get out and dance, and they would finish, and then the next couple, and then the next couple, and so on. And then I devised this way of take one step and having 3 or 4 different couples do the same step at the same time to the same music and dancing alongside of each other. And it made it more of a ensemble dancing, Well, that was one of the highlights in Lindy Hopping, and one of the things that actually made it interesting to a lot of producers of shows and movies and things like that.
So the next step was you were involved in some shows and movies as choreographer.
Yes, there was a group that was called Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. The leader of the group was Herbert White. We call him Whitey because he had a white streak in his hair. And he was one like kind of got these youngsters together. They got permission to come to the Savoy at any time that we wanted. We could go there in the daytime or we could go there in the nighttime, and we would get free admission to the ballroom because when we were in the ballroom, we were like entertainers because a lot of movie stars and big-time entertainers would come to the Savoy Ballroom just to see the dances. And most of the time, the manager, who was Mr. Charles Buchanan, he would say, well, hey, Whitey, can you get a group of kids, just to dance, in a certain spot because we have some movie stars there. It was like his company, I'd say. And he booked shows for us and everything and got us into movies, into theaters, and into Broadway shows.
I was interested to see that you were in Marx Brothers' A Day at the Races.
Well, actually, I was not in Day at the Races, but Whitey's Lindy Hoppers was in Day at the Races. And that was the first major movie Whitey's Lindy Hoppers made was in 1936, was Day at the Races. But as a result of that particular movie, we had a contract to make another movie in 1937. And the one in 1937 was made with Judy Garland, and it was called Everybody Sing.
Teacher says I shouldn't sing those Tin Pan Alley songs. I should sing of love and spring. Like low hill gentle lark, low hill the gentle lark. But I will not sing of love and spring, for when I sing, I'm gonna sing, I wanna sing, I'm gonna sing of swing. I wanna hear a horn a tootin' against the beat. I wanna feel the muddy waters round my feet. I wanna kill myself a dancing down the street. I wanna stand right up and swing.
And right from then on, we just started we made about 7 different movies out in Hollywood.
Were you working as a dancer or choreographer or both at that time?
Well, they have their own choreographers to these different studios. And I don't know if you realize, but back in those days, like in the 30s and 40s, they did not say choreographers. That word was not even in the dictionary. Choreographer didn't come into the dictionary till in the 50s when Agnes DeMille did Oklahoma, and they said that she choreographed Oklahoma. But before that, if you watch those old musicals, they say dance is staged by such and such a person. And when we went to Hollywood, Lindy Hopping was so new that none of those instructors or directors knew anything about Lindy Hop.
They barely knew anything about making films.
Right. But naturally, we would have to do our own, our own work, our own choreography. But they would get the credit for doing that,
So really, you still got that chance to improvise and work out your own routines.
Yes.
Though you weren't credited for them.
Yes, many times, yes.
I imagine there was a vast difference between performing live in a bustling ballroom next to a hot band and performing for film.
Yeah, it was a lot of difference, I'll tell you that, because generally, in the early years of movies and musicals and all that, and Lindy Hopping being new to the movies. And they would give us a certain amount of space to say, well, don't go beyond this space. Don't go farther back. Don't go further forward. And they say, well, you got to dance in this certain amount of space because cameras that they used were stationary rather than cameras that they can use nowadays. They could move them around. They put a camera on a guy and he can go around and follow you wherever you go. And then we didn't have like a live band to dance to. They would get a house band, and they would record the music. After that, we would dance to the tape that band had played, So it was a lot of difference because we were so used to, the band being right here, and saying, hey, man, how you doing, Jim,
And there's a magic with the live performance and the band and the dancers playing off each other that obviously you can't get when you're making a film.
Yeah, of course not. Yes, that's actually right.
Had you ever thought about dancing as a possible lifelong avocation?
Well, I tell you, up until 1937, or I say 1936, I hadn't thought of dancing as a career, just as something that I love to do. But I was chosen by Whitey to go into the Cotton Club, and the Cotton Club was like, like the ultimate,
Yeah.
every act out there want to dance at the Cotton Club, man, because, you go in a Cotton Club, that's like the tops, So when I was chosen to go into Cotton Club, that's when I thought, I said, well, okay, if they want me in a Cotton Club, I must be pretty good, so maybe I can make something out there. And that actually was the beginning of the whole thing. The Cotton Club was a big thing for me and the group that went into the Cotton Club, because after that we started doing movies and we started traveling around the country and to other different countries.
Who was playing at the Cotton Club? Who were the bands playing at the Cotton Club at that
Well,
time?
we happened to be dancing with one band that was not so famous. So, you ever heard of this guy, Cab Calloway? Yeah, it was Cab Calloway's band and Bill's Bojangles Robinson. And I don't know if you ever heard of Ethel Waters.
Of course.
And
one of the greatest singers of all time.
Right. So I had the opportunity to work with these people, darling. So I was, gee, wow. I said, yeah, well, listen, I'm there with these great people. Maybe this is what I'm going to be.
Now, you mentioned that came the 1940s, you began to tour with artists and tour around the world. And
yeah, with Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan, Pearl Bailey, Sammy Davis Jr., Nat King Cole. Ooh, and I can just go on and on. And I can't say that any one of them that I worked with was a bad person. They all were just great people, Of course, everyone has an ego, So, and if they didn't have, they wouldn't be where they were. So we used to have a wonderful time.
Many vocalists have told me when they sing, they're telling a story. Is that what dance is about for you? Are you interpreting something more abstract, or are you telling a story with the dance?
The things that you see, you can portray them in dancing. I happened to see a scarecrow. They had made one of these scarecrows to scare away the scarecrow. And I was passing by on this bus, and I saw this particular sign, and a scarecrow just standing up there, And then when I went to dance, I thought about this particular figure that I had seen in the field. And then I started making up a step that what we call a scarecrow. And then in another movie, I saw Charlie Chaplin walking, and he slipped on a banana peel. And the way that he slipped was, to me, was rhythmic. So I put that in the dance, So this is what we do. But we usually like to dance to rhythm and swing music.
Part of the Frankie Manning legend, as I understand it, is that you left dancing for quite a few years in the 1950s or so?
Yes, in the middle of the 1950s, about 1954, I actually retired from dancing, and I went into the post office.
Now, what prompted that decision?
Well, actually, there was not much work out there for us to do, and the dance world was changing. Like when I came back out the Army in 47, bebop music was a thing, and that was not the kind of music to do the kind of dance that we were doing. So our jobs became fewer and fewer, and television was coming into the forefront. You could go on a television show, but you may not go on that show again until next year or something like that, So there was a lot of changes were being made, and as I said, the jobs were getting very scarce, and I got married and started raising a family, and I said, well, And my wife said, "Well, listen, you gone so much. If one day you gonna come back and I ain't gonna be home." So I said, "Well, guess I better try to get something to stay around the house." So I went into the post office, and it was pretty fortunate that I picked the post office because I had already been in the service, and both of those was like government jobs. So it was like I was continuing my government job, you know.
And then what happened to get you back into the dance world?
Well, actually, and say like 1986, 87, there was a young couple, Aaron Stevens and Stephen Mitchell. They had been working with Al Mims, who was also one of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. They wanted to learn how to do the Lindy Hop, so they had called him and he agreed to work with them. But he had passed away, so they were looking for someone else, you know, that they had seen in these movies, you know, like Hell's a Pop and Day at the Races. And a fellow named Bob Crease, who was president of the New York Swing Dance Society, who was right there in New York. He said, "Well, there's a fellow, Frankie Manning. I don't know if he want to teach, but you can call him." So they called me and asked me if I would work with them, you know, like teach them how to do this Lindy Hop. So at first I said, "Well, I don't do that anymore," you know. But then I saw them dance, and I said, "Well, you know, somebody gave me a chance when I was younger, so maybe I can help them." And that's how it got started.
Did you ever dream in the 1930s you'd be spreading the steps of Lindy Hop around the world in the next century?
In my wildest dreams, I never dreamt that, and I can have some wild dreams too. But it has always been. I mean, even when I first started Lindy Hopping, it was one of Whitey's wishes that he could spread the dance, you know, like all across the country, all around the world. But he didn't have that. He didn't have no television or videos or anything like that in that period of time.
The mass media we have now.
Right. So what he used to do, like when we used to travel with him, wherever we went, if there was a jukebox there, he would put money in it and he'd say, "Y'all dance." So this was his way of getting it to other people who didn't get a chance to see it. And his thoughts were always, "I wish everybody in the world could do this." And that's how I came up wishing the same thing, that everyone could do this particular dance, because it's to me, it's such a wonderful, happy dance. And I usually tell people I never seen a Lindy Hopper who was not smiling.
Is that the secret to your longevity?
Yes, because if I wasn't dancing, I don't think I would be here today. Like Duke Ellington says, music is his mistress, dancing is my mistress.
Frankie Manning, thank you so much for coming in today. It was such a pleasure to meet and visit with you.
Well, it has been a pleasure talking to you. Wow.